When you work for the company that makes Rabbids, just how many toys do you walk away with that you don't need?
I'm Mac Fraser.
I'm Backrolls.
And we're the Nintendo Nerds.
We're a new comedy and gaming duo here to help you craft and play your way to a better day.
We met in the not-too-distant past during some spirited online Mario Kart, and as it turns out, we share a love for art, gaming, and all things Nintendo.
And we want to share our nerdy knowledge with you.
So stick around, because in today's episode of the Nintendo Builders Corner, we are joined by Jay Poyadue of Ubisoft.
Now, Jay is an e-commerce and data science expert for Ubisoft. And if you are not familiar with Ubisoft's work, I have to ask, how'd you find a nerdy video like ours? Following the surprise success of the wild Mario and Rabbids Kingdom battle, the relationship between Ubisoft and Nintendo has never been better, having brought such stellar titles to the Switch as Starlink, Battle for Atlas, Assassin's Creed, and upcoming in the early spring, Gods and Monsters. And if you're trying to purchase those games digitally, Jay is an integral part of making that happen. Jay, thanks so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Oh, it's so awesome to have you. We're really excited. Before we jump into the life of such a gigantic video game company, we'd like to highlight how you found your way into the industry, because we know each other from a previous job. A wonderful group of people were banded together working for a smart device accessory company that decided to close up North American operations, so we no longer work together, but 5 years at that company helped to prepare you for applying for a job at Ubisoft. In a world where lots of people in the video game industry get work because that's specifically what they went to school for, I'm sure our audience would love to hear your story of someone who had a less traditional route into the gaming world.
Yeah, so it was really just a happy accident. You know, I'm definitely a rare case for the gaming industry, but I actually just sort of applied sight unseen to a position that I saw posted on LinkedIn. And somehow, by some magic of the internet, I had my resume selected out of the pile and got to jump into the interview process and share my love of games, and it all just sort of worked out as a opportunity that made sense for my skill set and definitely a good personality fit. So that's how I just sort of randomly stumbled into the industry.
So how intense is a process for such a company of that size compared to a little teeny tiny company like the one we worked for?
It's definitely a different experience. The interview process was actually pretty similar. Moshi put me through the ringer a little bit, so it wasn't necessarily a more difficult process of getting through all the interviews and applications and all that stuff. It was really just I think the hard thing is being picked out of a pile of so many interested applicants.
Well, especially when you would think so many of these applicants are video gamers who are like, I have to work for Ubisoft, and I have been working my whole life and through education to work for Ubisoft or a company like that.
Absolutely, and it's really interesting getting into the industry and finding out sort of how incestuous it is for the talent. People do a lot of bouncing around between producers and titles, and it's sort of like a once you're in, you're in deal. So I was really fortunate to have the opportunity to come in as a complete outsider.
Oh, well, that's awesome. So the world of data science and e-commerce doesn't make B-roll we can show anyone where it would look anything other than what it is. A bunch of numbers and problem solving. So for many of us, math was a skill we couldn't wait to get through in school, so we could, for the most part, stop using it entirely. Where or when did you discover that you had such a good brain for data and that you could use it to pay your bills?
You know, that was another sort of happy accident. At the company where Backrolls and I worked before, I started out on the customer service side, and just through the fact that it was such a small company and I had a chance to try so many different try my hand in so many different sides of the business, it just sort of worked out that data and spreadsheets in particular were an area where I was really strong and had a particular knack for manipulating information in Excel. So I think that's probably going to be my calling going forward, and I ran with it, and fortunately it did work out that way.
Well, and Excel is such a strange entity for those on the outside of it who really only had to use it once or twice for projects in middle school, high school, just to prove that we worked on it once on a computer. But the reporting that you can do working with you is actually an eye-opening experience to me, that it's such a amazingly versatile tool. The reports that you can generate so simply, and you can do so much with so little, even if you learn just the basics of Excel.
Definitely. It's it gives you as much as you're willing to take out of it. And the more upfront legwork you do in Excel, the more you can simplify your day to day and really get meaningful reports that you can upload, raw data files into and just sort of let Excel do its magic and spit out actual usable information.
Yeah,
So it's really a great tool.
I've retained only just the bare minimum because operations is now a past life for me from a couple years ago, but even then hearing people in conversation like, "Oh, if only I had a way to put all of these things down on paper and then I don't know, alphabetize it." You're like, "Oh, that is literally the 101."
Right.
I think that Excel is a way more robust tool than most people give it credit for.
And way
You know what I
more
mean?
than the rest of the Office suite, definitely.
Oh, absolutely.
Definitely. There's a lot of functionality in Excel that I feel like is behind the scenes that day-to-day user is maybe not aware of that really makes it a kick-ass tool.
Well, I can speak firsthand that the world of operations is a job of peaks and valleys, feast and famine, but when we were in the ops world together, that was, again, for a pretty small company. Now you're a part of Ubisoft, the fourth largest publicly traded video game company out there. I'd imagine that comes with an entirely different wealth of problems than when you're working for a tiny company that had less than 40 people in the office. What are your thoughts on that?
It does and it doesn't. The beauty of working with a tool like Excel and working with data is that the scale changes, but a lot of the process involved with manipulating data and working it around and using it for analysis is very similar no matter how much the scale changes. So it's in a lot of ways it's like doing the same job, but instead of working with maybe smaller numbers, I'm working with slightly bigger numbers now.
Well, that must be kind of reassuring, too, because we certainly had our fires to put out in small business, but to move up to the big leagues and to work for a larger company and then to say, oh, I already have experienced this problem, that must do away with some of the imposter syndrome that is such a recurring theme with our guests on this channel.
It definitely does. It helped going in with sort of a background of, especially just coming from this more startup-y environment and having to problem solve on the fly for things that aren't necessarily established. Super helpful for getting into I guess a higher pressure, I would call it, environment, and already having some comfort with working through the sort of issues that pop up with data getting spit out incorrectly or trying to do a VLOOKUP that just won't work for whatever godforsaken reason.
and if anyone knows Excel, a VLOOKUP can be your best friend or your very worst enemy if it won't work for you.
That is so true.
Well, it seemed like Ubisoft was the next logical step in your career progression, but large doesn't even really begin to cover the scope of the company. There's currently 46 different operating studios, and as Backrolls so eloquently put it to me, it's like reading locations off of a fashion house sheet. Paris, Milan, Shanghai, Quebec, and so many more. Is there sometimes problems of too many cooks in the kitchen? And how much of a pain is it when you need answers from the other side of the globe?
I think there are always challenges in trying to run a global operation, just working between time zones and different schedules, different vacation schedules, and everything like that, even right down to having slightly different versions of the same systems. So there are definitely challenges to having things sort of regionally divided, but working for a global vision. But at the same time, the scale of Ubisoft and the systems that are in place are so much more established, and there are so many more processes that already exist than what you're getting in a smaller startup sort of environment. So you do run into a lot of challenges, but at the same time the framework for dealing with those challenges at a company that's established like Ubisoft is a much better and easier thing to navigate.
Do you report like primarily to the same at the same set of people, or like are there different projects that have you like reporting to different people in different offices around the world at any given time?
It depending on if we're doing something to overhaul the way we store, ingest data, I get involved with different teams from different offices all over the world and get to work through certain projects. But at the same time, my core day to day is mostly limited to the NCSA business, and then I have a counterpart over there that does a similar role. And just because of the global nature of some of our products, like as the business gets increasingly digital, there's a little bit more need for that interaction getting on the same page between regions.
Well, and it seems like rather than needing to work with the artistic teams that are developing these programs, it seems like you are more involved in the Ubisoft structure and hierarchy of how do we release these games, and how do we make sure in this upcoming more and more digital era it's as efficient as possible.
Definitely. I'm more of a behind the scenes guy, so I don't get a lot of hands-on interaction with the games while they're in development or anything like that. But I work with like the finance teams and the analysis teams and make sure that we know that people are buying our games, who is buying our games, what is bringing them back, how often they're playing, all of that stuff is sort of under the blanket of the operations and tracking sales from all of our different partners and everything. All that comes down and falls on my plate.
Well, one thing in particular we aren't used to managing is guests that have a non-disclosure agreement. Do you feel a little bit like you've been able to peek inside all the Christmas presents before everyone else?
I wish I did get to do a little bit more of that. Just because of the nature of my position, there's a need for me to be a little bit ahead of the game in terms of getting things set up for our future launches, but I'm pretty far down the road compared to some of the other heads in the building as far as getting the early peeks at what's coming out.
Well, you're still ahead of me. I mean, sometimes we go for coffee, and Jay is such a trooper. I try to get right up to that line sometimes, but you never cross it. Like, full disclosure to everyone listening, if anyone from work is listening, he is a true Boy Scout. He never crosses that line.
He can keep a secret.
But I'm sure I'm not the only nosy friend. I'm sure it's both exciting and slightly anxiety-inducing. I mean, we've been wanting to talk about Gods and Monsters for some time together, but there's just not enough that Ubisoft has put on the table yet.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. I know people are definitely interested. They want to get the inside secrets, and I'm a gamer myself, and it excites me knowing sort of when things are coming down the pipeline that are exciting to me, that I'm looking forward to getting a chance to play. So it is a challenge sometimes trying to reel it in and remember what is, allowable to share and what's not, but try to nail it down as much as I can.
How much information are you privy to, like, of things like let's talk, for example, like E3, when Ubisoft's got a press conference that's happening? Do you get an idea of what is coming before then? Do you get like the highlights of it, or do you find out at the same time as everyone else?
I'll find out a little bit before everyone else, but not so far in advance that I'm like carrying the weight of these secrets for years or anything like that. I'm a couple of months ahead of the stage in the process.
Fair enough. So having a job with such ups and downs, like, how do you rest yourself and manage your stress levels during crunch times? Is it anything like in the last company? Do you get down on Nintendo 64 breaks, or do Ubisoft employees burn their stress off in other ways?
That's a good question. I mean, Ubisoft has a lot of different initiatives that try to improve the work-life balance for employees. So they have things like there's a Good Times program where we get to take a break every quarter and go out for a team building exercise, and we have intramural sports, and you can imagine there are gaming platforms and things to do spread all over the office. So if you really want to get in some gaming time, not hard to find.
I would bet not.
And it's not too difficult to at least try and convince someone that it's slightly work-related.
Right. Well, we also get to do so there are like internal competitions that Ubisoft will host that are employee team game competitions where we compete playing our own titles, and we get the chance to actually compete for some pretty cool prizes, like trips out to the Paris office to compete in front of our
How
closed
awesome
circuit.
is that?
Well, it seems like it's really great for the people that have had the chance to win and go do it, but I have not.
Well, fingers
been
crossed
on one
for
of
you.
those teams.
Fingers crossed for you in the future. It's funny that it's nice to hear some of these things that you're talking about with regards to initiatives for like healthy living and work-life balance and all that stuff, because it wasn't that long ago, Backrolls, you and I had a conversation just about about crunch times in the industry and how it's very important that these kind of situations happen less often than not, because we got to make sure that the people creating the games and the people working to get these games released to all of us so that we can play them have proper time to spend with their families and that they can be healthy because they have the time to sleep properly and eat properly. So it's really nice to hear that Ubisoft spends time and money making sure that that you as an employee and your coworkers as employees are well taken care of.
Definitely. I think they realize the importance of keeping people fresh and invested, and so it's definitely something that's an area of focus.
Well, there's nothing like being tired and fatigued to make you not want to show up and do the artistic work. That is absolutely a way to burn yourself down at both ends of the candle.
Definitely.
We're really excited to have you on as someone that's knowledgeable in today's world of data and e-commerce to ask you a little bit about a point you already brought up about the future of game streaming. Now, Ubisoft took a venture into this a little ahead of the curve. Uplay debuted back in 2009 to what was a pretty rocky start. 2009 was just too early to require many gamers to have that kind of connection, but now Uplay Plus is coming to Google Stadia. So with Ubisoft leaning into game streaming services, what new challenges do you see facing you in this upcoming world of e-commerce?
As far as the data side of the streaming world, it's definitely going to be a challenge figuring out how to track player involvement, just because there's not as much division between the different versions of the games, and the purchases aren't necessarily a one-time thing anymore. It's more moving into a subscription service. So sort of tracking that involvement is definitely it's creating some interesting problems for us to solve in terms of how to track that data, how to ingest it, how to manage it.
Yeah, then what do you do with that too? Because games as a streaming service is an entirely new model, and for a company as big as Ubisoft, that kind of makes sense. Someone who can actually put out these games on an annual basis.
Definitely. For me, it's a really exciting chapter for the future of gaming and getting to sort of be behind the scenes as this big development is happening and seeing how our company is responding to the growing demand for streaming as a model, and what to do with it and how to optimize it and make sure we're delivering the best experience to our players, and also make sure that we're set up to understand how we can make it the best experience possible.
I see Ubisoft being one of the biggest players in the game to really get involved in these new things like the Uplay Plus and coming through Google Stadia and all that kind of stuff. And I think you guys are doing well to position yourselves ahead of the curve, because I think the industry is changing quite a bit.
Yeah, it seems like the whole concept of what gaming means and what receiving entertainment means has sort of blossomed with the growth of Netflix and Hulu and all of these other television streaming services. So it's a natural progression to carry that model into gaming too, but it's definitely fun being at sort of the forefront of making that a reality in the gaming industry.
And it makes a lot of sense because gamers aren't really strangers to binging things. We are very well accustomed to spending a full long weekend on a game.
I'm sorry if I don't answer my phone for the next 3 days. Why is that? Oh, because Zelda comes out and I'm not going to be available. But I think that's going to be about it.
I am really looking forward to that one myself.
But it will be interesting in today's era because gamers are accustomed to that. We are all of a certain age where we used to be handed the games and they said we guarantee at least this many hours of gameplay. But with so many things vying for our attention now and so many things vying for our wallet, it will be so interesting to see Ubisoft, among so many other companies, venturing into this new Wild West territory of trying to get our attention. Not only is there video games, there's Disney Plus and Hulu are taking bigger swings. There's Netflix that's surely going to try and adapt and overcome because they are in trouble these days.
Definitely. And I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to the quality of the product. As long as you're putting something out there that people want, and you're giving them a great experience, then that sort of competition for people's time will take care of itself. And I think Ubisoft does a great job of listening to feedback from our players and making sure that what we're putting out there is a great experience and something that's worth taking the time away from doing something else like Disney Plus to take the time to play.
I think it's really interesting because especially with the development time on games these days, like if you look at a game like Breath of the Wild that took, 6 years or whatever it was to make, it's not like the early 2000s where you could put out a quality game on the PS2 in maybe a year and a half, 2 years, right? But now we're spending movie-sized budgets on these games, and you can't build worlds that are that big and just kind of end it at the initial release of the game. Like you do really need to keep building on these worlds more, right? It doesn't seem like an effective way to use the company's time to build such massive games and then just say, okay, the game's finished, that's all. Especially because you're going to have a client base and gamers who are going to want to learn even more. And when you spend as much time as you do running around some of these worlds, these Breath of the Wilds and the Witchers and all that kind of stuff, you don't just want it to be over. You want a continuing saga. You want more things to learn over time.
Definitely. I think gaming is definitely a service industry, and the games as a service model is really sort of one of Ubisoft's driving tenets. We definitely try to keep investing time and energy back into the games that our players love. Like, look at Rainbow Six. We're still creating new content for Rainbow Six, and it's been 5 years, almost 5 years since it launched, and there's so much love for that game and people are so invested in it that we want to make sure to keep continuing to offer new and exciting content without necessarily needing to completely change up and leave behind the game that you fell in love with.
I think that's a really smart way to look at it.
And it seems like Ubisoft is doing a really smart balance of paying attention to what made them the company that it is and trying to evolve into something new. They really were the king of the open world. Assassin's Creed, when it came out, was gigantic. It was overwhelming, the kind of scope of what you could accomplish in that game. And I think it's smart of Ubisoft to realize that, yes, we are the king of the open world, but we also need to make sure that we have an invested pipeline of players who love our content and are actively asking for more in a subscription base.
Definitely. The open world environment allows a little bit more flexibility to do that, I think, just because it's always a possibility of sort of expanding the scope of that world that we've created. So
a new peninsula added on to Assassin's Creed Odyssey, kind of. Finally, what's exciting you in the year to come for Ubisoft? What video games have you really waiting with bated breath and anticipation for Nintendo platforms or otherwise?
You hit on it a little bit earlier, but you mentioned Gods and Monsters. I'm super excited for Gods and Monsters to come out. I'm really looking forward to seeing that on Switch. It will be my preferred platform, but it'll be on other consoles as well. But that one has me really crossing my fingers for the future. And I'm also pretty excited about Watch Dogs Legion, which is kind of taking a new approach to the protagonist in
that
games.
one really took me by surprise this E3. I was very impressed.
About that a lot.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to play around with it yet, so I'm still about as up to speed on it as everybody else in the world, but I think the concept of everybody in the universe of the game being a playable character and sort of getting to write your own story sounds really cool, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how that works in practice and how fun it is to really get behind the sticks and play it.
Well, Jay, we will be sure to have you back in the spring to talk more Gods and Monsters when there's finally no NDA about it.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to knowing more about it so that I can share more with you.
Well, thank you so much for taking some time with us today, Jay. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. This was a lot of fun.
As always, we hope you leave this video ready to pick up a Pro Controller, a paintbrush, or a pen. I'm Backrolls.
I'm Mac Fraser, and this has been the Nintendo Nerd.